Hey, it's Kevin Deutsch here and welcome back to the Recording in a Home Music Studio course. In this video, we're going to talk about getting your song ready for mixing. Alright, so I'm assuming at this stage that you have a fully finished recorded song. Hopefully. If not, yeah, I'm hoping you're getting close to it or you're thinking about doing it shortly. But let's say you have finished recording your song and the next stage after that is going to be mixing. Okay, now that may not be done straight away, it may be done in a little while, whatever it is. But there's a process that I like to follow to get my song ready for mixing because it helps me. And I'm going to tell you all about it and you can feel free to follow it if you like or take certain parts of it, whatever helps you through your mixing phase, because you know there's totally different workflows. My workflow is not necessarily right for everybody and this is my workflow, so you can agree or disagree with it at your leisure. So the first thing I like to do is basically do like a save as or a backup or a copy of my song to another folder and give it a different name, right? And you might just append it with mixing or whatever you want to do, just to differentiate it from your actual recording. Because as I said, we're going to get this song ready for mixing, but there may be a need to have the recording session kept somewhere else in its raw form the way it was right now. And so this is why I'm suggesting that you copy it to another folder as another project with a slightly different name. As I said, maybe you just append it with the word mixing on the end of the song title or whatever you called the project, so that you know that this is the one you're going to work on for mixing. And the other one is the recording session, so that if we ever do need to go back to that because you want to re-record parts or anything else went wrong, you've still got that raw recording session ready to go, just backed up somewhere else. So once we've copied it, I'm assuming that you've gone through the cleaning up phase, because that's obviously the first important part, was to clean up the session. But now what I want to do is any of the virtual instruments that we recorded, anything that has MIDI data or anything else, now I like to bounce them out individually as audio files. And then what I'll do is bring those audio files back into my session on a track, label it as what it is, and then I will remove the virtual instrument track, or at least freeze or hide it. Removing it is probably a better option, especially if you've got your other recording session raw data copy. So I remove those virtual instruments. Now, the advantage of that to me anyway is it's sort of a mental thing. One, it stops me being tempted to go back and change those recordings and tweak the notes or tweak the VIs or anything like that. At this stage, I've made my decision. I'm happy with how it sounds in the recording phase. I want to move to mixing. I don't want to go and adjust those. I don't want to record any of those other parts. I don't want to tweak any of that MIDI data. So I'm going to lock it in. This is what I'm doing. I'm locking it down by bouncing it out to audio files and bringing it back in. It's going to limit what I can change as a mixing engineer, which is exactly what I want. I want to now mix it. I don't want to continue producing it or recording it. Now, the other bigger benefit is that virtual instruments take up a lot of processing power, right? Because there's software, they are running, they are creating sounds from MIDI notes. Audio files are not as demanding, okay, because they're just playing audio. You've already bounced and processed those audio files, so now they're just on a track playing. So if you remove all of those virtual instruments from your song in mixing, you now leave a lot of processing power available to you to start putting mixing plugins on. If you're still running your VIs, you might find that you're going to struggle because there may not be much processing power left for you to use plugins in your mixing session. So doing this way is going to free up that processing power, get the virtual instruments out of your song, and allow you to use lots of mixing plugins as you need to. All right, and that is as simple as what I do to get my song ready for mixing. So let's go over to the song now and I'll show you exactly what I'm talking about. All right, so now we're in Cubase. It's time to get our song ready for mixing. Now, again, this is a personal thing that I do to separate my process, my mixing stage from my recording stage. You may be somebody that just likes to do everything together. You record, you mix, you master, all in the same project. You don't do any separation. You do it as you go. You might mix as you go. You may put effects on as you go. You may master as you go. Right? I'm not going to tell you right or wrong. That's entirely up to you what the workflow is that you like. The first step I would do with this project, other than we've cleaned it up, we've saved it, we've got it backed up, whatever else. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually back up the project. And this is the folder that we are currently in, Home Music Studio Song. I'm actually going to go back one level and I'm going to create a new folder. I'm going to call it Home Music Studio Song Mixing. All right, you can call it mix. You can give it anything you want, whatever you feel is going to work for you. And then I'm going to go in here and I'm going to say that's my folder. Now we get many options here. We can now also give it the project a new name. So I'm going to add mixing to the end. We have these options here about what we want to do. So for instance, in the cleanup process, I talked about removing unused files, from the pool, etc. Now let's assume that you didn't do that. You wanted to keep them there for safety, all that sort of stuff. What you might want to do though is not move them to the new project, to the mixing project. So you might want to keep the unused files in your recording one, but not bring them with you to the mixing one. So if you have this ticked, remove unused files, it will not actually remove them from your original project. It just will not copy them across to the new project. Okay, it will sort of technically remove them. Now, how you have these other tick files, entirely up to you. Keep current project active, whatever. You can untick that and it will open in the new project. Minimize audio files. I think what that does is basically compress and cut them all down if you've edited, like let's say you've trimmed the start and end off the audio files, this would actually shrink the audio files. I don't do that because I just don't like the risk of modifying the audio files, so I just don't do that. Make direct offline processing permanent. I don't bother with that either. And do not back up video. Well, I don't have any video, so I'm not bothering to do that. So these are the settings I will use, and I'll just go OK. And you can see it's copying files, blah, blah, blah. All right, and because I didn't untick the box to keep it active, we're still in the same project, right? Just remember that. If you've left it the settings I have, you are still in the same project you were in before. All right, but if we go back to our folder here, you can see here's our original recording folder. Go back one, we can go to our mixing folder here. You can see we've got our project folder here. And here's all the audio files that it believes we need to be in here. So now what we could do is actually close this project. Then what I'm going to do is go to the new project and open that up. Okay, and we hope that no errors pop up. If there's any errors pop up about missing files or anything like that, obviously you need to deal with that and sort it out. That should not be the case. If you've done everything properly, it shouldn't be the case. And our project looks the same, but you'll see we are now in the mixing one. The next step I do is just make sure it plays and flick through to make sure there is some audio and it sounds like our song. All right, so it seems that the project has been moved or copied to another location under mixing. So we have our original recording one here. Doesn't have recording on it. We could have called it recording. That probably would have made sense. You could now go and back this up, zip it up, archive it, go and put it on another hard drive, get rid of it, right? You want to store it away somewhere because you don't want to access this now anymore. Now, in my case here, I just like to get rid of these silly back files when I'm not working on a song anymore. I know that original project, the main project file, the last save is good. I don't need to go back to a previous saved version, like an autosave. So I'll generally delete them. So it's cleaned up. They're all gone. They're just taking up space. I don't need them. Because this project now is locked. It is done. I'm not touching it anymore. This is my recording and it's locked away. I'm not going back to it. Not unless I really, really need to. So I would more than likely probably zip it up or something like that, right, into a file. So I'm just going to go zip, right, with this 7-zip or whatever compression program you've got. It'll try to make all of the files obviously smaller, contain it into one file. Then I could delete this folder if I wanted to and go and copy this in numerous places. Please back this file up because if you lose it, you will never go back to that program. But we'll leave it there for now because I'm not actually doing that right now. But you can see we've got our new mixing one. Now this is the one we're going to be working on going forward in our mixing project. But what we want to do is a few extra things. One is we could now delete the rough, but I'm going to keep the rough there because sometimes, depending on the rough, this rough here was just my little, not a mixing rough, but sometimes you'll have a mixing rough you might want to keep there to reference to make sure you're doing a better job and making sure that everything is, working well. But what I like to do now is I want to get rid of all the virtual instruments. I want to lock down these sounds, okay? I am happy with all of the sounds. All of the performances are what I want. I want them to be audio files. So you can see here the vocals, they are all audio files. The samples, they are all audio files. So that's good. The orchestra, you can see here, this is all MIDI data, okay? And it has a virtual instrument, which is Equator. Okay, so what we can do is we could just solo it. Make sure it sounds the same. I've had instances where VIs have decided to go funny and do silly things. And again, depending on your program, it will depend on how you actually do this. Now, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to highlight this part. Now, just keep in mind, we've got no other effects on here or anything else. Definitely worth keeping in mind. The other thing I want to quickly do too, just for the sake of this, because we're going into mixing, I'm going to put all of my levels to 0. And I'm going to reset all my pans. Now this is entirely up to you. You may not want to do this. You may want to leave them as is. I'm just resetting everything back to just sort of square one here. So we can deal with our mix, with fresh ears and fresh thoughts and not be locked in with what we had. But as I said, you may prefer to mix as you go during the recording process and you do not want to wipe this stuff out. I'm actually going to do that. All right, so we've got that. I'll leave them muted for the moment. Whoops, we didn't want to solo that. Okay, so all our faders are at 0. All our pan controls are back to default. We have no effects on any of these. The only effects that are on here are the virtual instrument itself, which is our sound. So I'm going to come here, I'm going to highlight this track, and I'm going to go render in place. I'm going to go into my render settings. Now there's a few options here, right? So in the mode, you could have it here as one event, and what that will do is it will create just one big audio file for this whole section here. You can do as block events or as separate events. I'm going to go as separate events, and what that's going to do is each of these little sections, it's going to create a section, an audio file, right? But it's going to still have it split, so these gaps will still be there because I don't want to lose that. I still want to have the gaps. Now we want to have it set to channel settings, tail mode. If you've got reverb on, you can turn tail mode on to allow it to go beyond the chop off there, so it includes any reverb. Yeah, see, if it includes a little bit of reverb, which this does, we may want to do that tail just to make sure that it doesn't get lost. So I'm going to add a tail on here. I'm just going to go 1 second. We can set custom files, the path location, which should default to our project folder. So I'm just going to leave that. And then it can set to mute the source events. Right, so if we go render in place now. Okay. Right, and it's given it the same name, but put an R on there just for, as in, you know, render, I guess. Now, it depends how you want to name it. In my case here, I don't want that on there because I will actually be getting rid of this. So, you know, we might just, you know, I might just put old here. You'll see it's muted it, so it won't play now. So like if I go solo, it's totally silent. But we go solo on this. We want to make sure that we've got good audio. Now see, that chopped off a little bit too early, didn't it? So I'm going to actually undo that because we need more of the reverb. I don't want to chop anything off here. Alright, so we're going to go render in place. We'll do the settings again. We'll just go 3. We'll try that. A lot of the time my stuff is dry, but it just depends. Some of these virtual instruments are not dry. Alright, so now let's go in and have a look. Okay, so that looks safely like it was definitely enough. Now, you can come back in here and trim this up. Put a fade in again, just make sure it's all neat and tidy. So we want to make sure that it... And look, if you want to unmute this section here, again, you can unmute it, obviously, and just do a comparison. So if we go here. Make sure it sounds the same. Sounds the same to me. So, as I said, we go and fix up the name to whatever you want it to be. Okay, you could mute that again if you want to mute it again or not. Alright, so I'll take the solo off. Going to take the input off because I don't need that. So we've got one audio file. Now what I would do is actually disable this MIDI file, but in reality, I'm actually going to delete it. And the reason I'm comfortable to delete it is because I know it's in my original backed up recording file project if I ever want to get it back. But I don't want to. I want to mix with audio files. I don't want to be playing with VIs. So I can then remove this track. Now we have this audio. Now what we want to do is repeat the process with this one. Now, the beautiful thing with Cubase is we've already got our settings set up. So we don't have to go, we can go into this settings all the time if we choose. But what you can also do is once you know your settings are the way you want them, just go render with current settings and it will just use the same settings it used before. Okay, so in theory we've done that one. Have another listen. So this is the one that was an octave down. Again, you could trim it, fade, whatever. I'm not going to check it. I'm confident that that is right. So I'm going to rename. Now, again, I could rename that, but I don't need to because I know I'm going to delete it. I don't even need to disable it because I'm going to delete it. Okay, so our orchestra is now ready. So now that we've converted these to audio files and I've deleted those two original tracks with the MIDI and the virtual instrument, you've now removed two virtual instruments from our project, which can be a hell of a lot of CPU power and processing power that was required to run those. Now we've got a lot more to get rid of. So in theory, this is going to give us a lot of capacity to load plugins and things like that in mixing, which we would have struggled to do with all of these virtual instruments. Anyway, so let's continue on. So we've got our percussion now, and we've got our shaker and tambo. They are already audio files because they were samples. But again, we've got our wood conga and our stick, which is again equator. So we want to remove this to save ourselves some processing power. Now I'm going to do this one slightly different because if I do these as all separate, if I select all of this and do it as separate parts, we're going to end up with lots of little audio files. So there's two ways I could do it. One is I could just select this section here and go render in place that, and it'll create a new track. But what we could also do is probably glue them together, and that way we can still do our separate parts. So I'm going to do that because now it's going to create one audio file if we do separate parts. So I'm just going to glue these various sections together just to create the separation that I want. Now, what I probably should have done, oh yeah, that's the bridge. What we probably should do is to say the verse. So we'll glue that one. It's actually button 4 and 1. All right, so it gets a bit harder. We're going to have to manually select each one of these now. Glue. Okay, good. All right. So now these are pretty much ready to go. So now what I could do is select all of that. And now we can do our render in place. And we'll keep the same settings. I don't know if this has reverb, but we'll keep the same settings anyway, just because it's simple. And if it does have any reverb, it will be included. Okay, so let's have a listen. Sounds like I remember it to sound. All right, so again, I'm going to take the input off. Can't remember if I did it on the other one, but we're going to get rid of this R because I don't want it. And we are going to remove this track. So again, we have removed another virtual instrument. Now we're going to do the same for the stick. Now, the only downside to this from a hard disk space point of view is that this is actually creating an audio file, whereas a MIDI file takes up practically no space on your hard disk because it's just computer data. All right, so it takes up no hard disk space. This audio file actually does. So we are creating more audio files and filling up our hard disk space a bit more. But I still prefer it, to be honest. Okay. I think that sounds like what it was. So we'll get rid of that again. So the reason that I suspect that it has created one big file is because the actual tail setting that I included actually was longer than the gap that was going to be there, so it actually just joined them all together instead of having them separate files. So you could trim them and whatever else, but the gaps are pretty small, so I'm not going to bother at this stage. Okay, so all our percussion is done.